All right, hey everybody, welcome back to Digging Deeper, here with Bobby, myself, Pete, for another episode. And we are finished. We have finished the first series officially as Pastor of Rise City.
Yeah.
So full month in, you're technically now a Californian. You're a Rise Cityan. But yeah, one full series in the books, and it was a good one. So 5 weeks spent looking at the church, based it in Acts and a lot of Acts 2, and then you kind of moved into all the way up to chapter 8 here this last Sunday.
Yeah.
So man, it was really cool. It was good.
It was
How you feeling now a month in? You feeling good?
Yeah. I'm starting to feel like, whenever, I don't know if you've obviously moved across the country before. I don't know if all of our listeners have, but when you move from one state to a new state, it takes a little bit to sort of feel settled, but it feels like home now. We're getting into some normal routines. Church feels like I know people's names. I don't know everyone's name yet, but I don't have to guess every time anymore. So that's nice as well. And things are going well. I enjoyed the series, super encouraged over the last 5 Sundays. Excited that I think 39 people committed their life to Jesus over the last 5 Sundays, which is incredible. And, to walk that through with people and to see people jump into the world of discipleship and what it means to follow Christ. So lots of good stuff. Yeah. Exciting times.
All right, so let's kind of where you landed. You started with a statement saying this message is a bridge to your next series, which you mentioned is, well, I know, but you mentioned from the stage, we're going to look at the whole shine aspect of our Wake Up, Rise, and Shine. But before that, you talked about this moment in the early church, and like early church, like within the first 5 years, probably at least, whereby you have this group of people in Jerusalem where all this happened. That's where Jesus is crucified and resurrected. The church starts there, and they're kind of hanging out there. They're like, all right, they're having their holy huddle in Jerusalem. A lot of Jewish people in Jerusalem are coming to faith. And you mentioned from earlier, before Jesus left, he had said, what I want you to do is be my witnesses in Jerusalem, but then also in Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth, meaning go. But by the time you get to Acts chapter 6 and 7, right in there, they haven't really gone anywhere yet. They're still there. But then Acts chapter 8 is when that sort of opens and the church begins to spread outwards. But what was cool about what you're saying and your whole point of your message was, it wasn't necessarily their decision to go. It was actually a response to some difficulty. Do you want to just kind of summarize for people? Maybe we're a day late now because of Labor Day, but just kind of recap like where you're coming at from that. And
obviously, Jesus tells them they're going to go. They're in Jerusalem. They're hanging out, and incredible tragedy happens. The first martyr, Stephen, is killed. He's stoned in Acts chapter 7. And it's a really, really bad, volatile situation. And the next thing you know, Saul's like, he's going home, house to house, home to home, and arresting any Christian he could find. And with the sole purpose of destroying the church. Obviously, it's not God's will that the church would be destroyed. But you can look at this text and see how God used this really horrendous situation to bring good and glory to his name and to spread the good news of Christ all across the globe. So this is sort of like the genesis of that moment. And I just loved the idea from this service. They were scattered, and the word scattered was the same word you would use if it was scattering seed. Mm-hmm. And so it's this idea of like when they got pushed out, they went. The wrong application would be God caused the tragedy and he's the one who did the bad thing. That's the wrong application that made it happen. But what God did do is used a really horrendous situation to bring good and glory to people all around the globe. We're here today. We are the ends of the earth, so to speak.
Sure.
And so, I know that can be a sensitive topic, though. There's a scripture. You might know the reference off the top of your head, but God works together all things for the good. But it doesn't mean it doesn't mean all things are good. Some things aren't good, but even bad situations can yield something good for someone who loves God and is called according to his purpose.
Yeah. So the idea of like, the pushing out, and I think the way that you sort of verbalized it was the way that pressure often leads to like things you wouldn't normally want to do. And you kind of gave the whole analogy of cleaning your house and things when you're under pressure. And the pressure of the church, the pressure on the church is actually what causes spread. I'm sure you've heard this before, but but in the 3rd century, a very famous Christian leader named Tertullian said, the blood of martyrs is the seed. It is what caught like this pressure of killing us is actually what's causing it to spread, because you're pushing us out into the world. You're creating a sense of the people can't be comfortable. They can't be sort of just lazy and stuck in their ways. They have to respond to this pressure. And it wasn't really until the pressure went away, by the 4th century that sort of stopped. That's when the church kind of stopped growing, is when the pressure went away.
What's interesting too, I think it's Acts 5 when Gamaliel, is that the proper pronunciation of his name?
Idea.
We're going to act like it is.
I wasn't there.
Gamaliel, he's the one he was like Paul's mentor, or Saul's mentor technically. And he's the one who said, hey, don't push too hard. Don't fight too hard, because he goes, there's these other guys who led revolts.
Sure.
They died. Their movements died.
Right.
So if you keep pushing, you're actually going to drive it somewhere, whatever. He says, let it be itself. And if it's not of God, it'll die off. It is of God, you might find yourself fighting against God. That was his advice to them. Obviously, Saul didn't listen. Neither did many of the old religious elite, and they just pushed into it harder.
Yeah. Sorry,
You're fine.
I'm a church history person. I like it. It's fun for me. But like the idea of them scattering, the other piece of that is if you push fast forward just a little bit, you're probably, we don't know exactly when this is happening, but it's probably mid 40s, somewhere in there. If you push forward about 20 years, another person rises up and claims to be a Messiah in the 60s. And starts a revolt, and the Jewish people rally, and they go to war against Rome, and Rome says nope and comes in and just decimates them. So the people they don't decimate are the Christians, because the Christians have already scattered. Had the Christians not scattered, they probably would have been wiped out in 67, which is really, and that's going back to even Matthew 25, when Jesus says, when you see this, flee, don't fight, go, like he wants them to scatter, to go into all the world. But it's always like pressure, and it's like getting us out of our comfort zones. So a personal question, practically in your own life, what are some times maybe that you have, this is like retrospect, obviously you wouldn't know it in the moment, but you look back and you say, hey, actually this season or this moment of pressure or difficulty in my life, I actually see the way that God used it to push me out into something I might not have done, or to bring about something good I wasn't expecting. Have you had moments like that in your life?
Sure. I mean, the first and most obvious, and probably the biggest, would be what happened with my biological father. I shared that story week 1 of the series, but disowned multiple times when I was a child. My biological father committed suicide when I was 16 years old. And so that was like excruciating. But it solidified things in me. So there were things that I know are a priority in my life because of the experiences I had as a child that hurt me. And so like one of the priorities in my life is what it means to be a father, to be a present father, to be, show my kids that I love them, to tell them that I love them, even things to that degree. And those were like really wretched, horrible situations as a kid to go through. And I wouldn't want any kid to go through it, but it helped shape me to, like, today, I am who I am because I experienced that negative thing that helped me not do that now. And I think any situation, it really lends itself to give us a sort of a crossroads, a fork in the road, a split. We can go one of two ways. And, I'd experienced a lot of things when I was a child. I'd seen a lot of things. I'd seen a lot of things. And the idea was that, my biological father, I talked about this on the Sunday, and he definitely was a heavy drug user and a heavy drinker, and I saw the negative effects on it. And being in it as a child was never fun. I remember I used to hate even just like cigarettes. I hated the way my clothes smelled because they smelled like cigarettes. And isn't that a weird thing? I don't even know why it was such a big deal to me. But when I was a kid, I hated the idea that my clothes smelled like cigarettes. And I was surrounded by it. And no one's going to go to hell for smoking cigarettes, I don't think. But
Did you hate it because you hated the smell, or what it made you feel at home, or like an embarrassment at school?
I think it embarrassed me. It embarrassed me. I think it didn't matter at home. It just, I don't know, it came with a certain stigma, I think, in my mind.
Sure.
And so, childhood in some ways was incredible. Like my parents sacrificed so I could play travel sports. And when I started playing travel sports, my mom worked. Now, travel sports in the 90s was a little different than it is today. But we still wore T-shirts as jerseys. But my mom worked at a gas station for a bulk of that, and then sold ads at a newspaper, and my dad who raised me worked at a factory. So they didn't have a lot of money. So they found ways to create incredible and great memories for my life. But there were some just really hard things that I went through, and there's family history that I said, I went to God and I was like, God, this is things I don't want to repeat. I don't want to repeat it in my life. I don't want to repeat it in my kids' lives. So that's some deep sort of harder moments. I've walked through when I was early in ministry in my 20s, my pastor at the time, he wasn't the senior pastor of the church, but he was my pastor, my leader. He did the wedding ceremony for me and Megan. And a man that I would look to and say, this is my spiritual father. And I don't know if how common that term is. But in the circle I was in, massive term, and it was huge. And I just came out of a season where when I met him, it was probably 2.5 years after my biological father committed suicide. And so I'm reeling through all that. I've met this man, loves God, loves his family. Incredible, just incredible situation. I'm like, wow, okay, cool. This is someone I can model my life after. And it would have been about 5 years later, maybe 7 years later, something in that window, where one night he woke up, left his wife, had an affair, left everybody, abandoned, the church, God, and, had a multitude of things. And his story wraps up, I don't want to tell the rest of his story because it's not my story to tell. But in the moment, I remember that because I was like, you have to be kidding me. I was like, first off, biological dad, but now I'm in a new space and I had a new father figure that I could look up to. And then just felt like, it was weird because what he did, he didn't do it to me, he did to his wife and to his son, but it felt like he did it to me as well, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so that was I remember just excruciating. And I remember for a season, Paul talks about this in one of his epistles, I don't remember which one, and he says there's many instructors, but few fathers. And I remember thinking, well, I don't care anymore. I was like, whatever. I'm in my mid-20s going, I don't care anymore, like I was when I was a teenager all over again. And I had to go to God with that, because what does it mean? What does spiritual father even mean? Is that a thing? And how do I respond even in those situations? And I think every situation we go through, there's a multitude of responses. Some of them are positive and some of them are negative. But ultimately, when it's all said and done, I want God to get the glory from it. And so maybe some of the things I would say from that, I have people in my life, guys that I've walked through life with, and girls, since they were teenagers. I was their youth pastor, and I was their pastor for many, 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 many years. But I would never use the word spiritual father for anybody else, which is an interesting concept. I remember going, this was my gut reaction. And this is just me processing. I haven't thought about any of this, so if I start sounding like a crazy person, just tell me. But I remember going, you can choose, you can't choose your biological father, but you could choose your spiritual father. So the spiritual father doesn't tell me he's my father. I get to choose myself. I was like, I'm not going to get hurt again. Protect myself. And so like I have people like I would have never used that terminology for them because I wouldn't have asserted it onto their life. But I would try to be a consistent person in their life that would always be available as best as I could be and help guide and lead and instruct and celebrate, not just tell them what to do, but be there for them in the big moments and the wins. And so I think the glory of God maybe in my story, in my life, is that there have been a lot of moments that, as I reflect, could have taken me out of church, out of ministry, out of relationship with God, because they were just sort of wretched situations. But God found a way to sort of like pull me close, and I chose not to run. I chose to try to help, try to understand, like went to God with it. And ultimately, I believe I'm in ministry now because I trusted God to lead me through those seasons, even though they were hard. And they've helped me be, like I said, I think all of our experiences help us become who we are now. So every good, every bad experience will shape some part of our identity as we age, as we mature. Some people, I remember, especially early in ministry, some people, I would look at them and go, all right, I'm going to learn what to do from you. And I remember there would be some people I was like, I think I'm going to learn what not to do from you. I don't know if you've ever experienced that before. But yeah. So, I mean, that's some like big things in life that were all negative, but somehow have yielded positive results now.
I was wondering, like, I'm going to use your story, not your personal, like from Sunday. You kind of told a funny story about, chilling and thinking, is Anthony going to come into my house? Should I clean it? And I almost feel like I need to preface this because there's this like theological pile behind it of grace versus works, how much is us, how much is God, all that kind of stuff. I'm not getting into that.
Okay.
But I think sometimes in my personal life, and I'm using my language, I'm not being precise here. Those experiences that you shared, I have similar ones. That pressure pushed me to clean my room. Like, you just said I learned what not to do. Like the pressure of going through that, of feeling the pain from the other people's decisions, watching the way it hurt others, was a pressure on me that I didn't want, I didn't like. It sucked. But looking back, it made me get up and start looking under my bed and what's in my closet. And like, I don't want to repeat this. Like the pressure forced me. And again, I know God's grace. I'm not saying I'm saved by works. I'm just saying maybe it's just even allowing the Holy Spirit to come in and start cleaning. Maybe that's a better way to say it, right? Like to be like, I need that pressure worked for me to start doing or allowing things to happen in my life that might not have had that pressure never happened. And I just wonder, like, do you think you would have even felt a call to ministry had some of that stuff not happened? Or do you think that still would have been there?
I don't know.
It's hard to say, right?
It's hard to say. I think there's elements of who I am that would not be there. Pressure is funny because generally speaking, no one likes it.
No, it's uncomfortable.
It's always uncomfortable. Now, we develop thresholds of tolerance of pressure, and throughout time, people, can learn to thrive in pressure, want the pressure because it makes them feel like they're more driven or motivated. It pulls the best out of them. It's the whole idea that we wait to do the project till the day before, kind of speak, because we think we work better under pressure. Typically, it's a lie. You don't work better under pressure. It's just you get it done faster. But because my house might be clean, like clean to the person who walks into it if I cleaned it in 30 minutes, but we both know that there's a room that's got a closed door that hasn't been touched, and we still didn't wipe down the baseboards, or like there's elements of it. But the point is yeah, I think there's things in my life definitely would not exist if it weren't for the pressure that was put on. What's interesting about pressure, though, is I feel like everyone has different levels of what they can handle. And it makes me wonder, what's the quote? It's like, it's hard times produce strong men, and then strong men produce good times, then good times produce weak men, then weak times produce hard times, then hard times produce strong men. It's this whole idea of cycle.
That's what you say when you want to talk about millennials.
Yeah, I'm a millennial though, so I take that offense by like 2 months.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, never mind.
Never mind. I'm.
Let's just both make fun of the Gen Z or over there behind the camera.
I always was like, I claimed Gen Xer for a long time, and because I didn't want to be put in the like title millennial. I didn't want that on me. And then I was looking into it and they're like, millennials hate titles. And I was like, the more I push this away, the more I realize I'm just anchoring.
Just keep falling back into it.
So
you can't escape your destiny.
Yeah. So I'm a millennial. It is what it is. But yeah, the idea there though is, as a parent or, as a dad or as a pastor, how much pressure do we want to relieve? And how much pressure do we, if you go through a lot of pressure, you want to make it easier for people. But sometimes making it easier doesn't actually make it better.
Right.
And knowing that little balance, which is
that's the hardest thing about, so like, well, you're in it, obviously, like being a senior level position of a church, especially lead pastor, pressure is good for people in some ways. Too much pressure will push them away. A little pressure could push them away, even if it's good pressure for them. And so the tension that you live with of constantly, like, even the idea of sending or calling people to go is sometimes difficult, because sending people or calling them to go and get out of their comfort zone often makes them unhappy with you. Often means if they leave, then there's less resources and time. There's so many reasons to just stay comfortable and keep everyone in the house and just going through the motions. And it's interesting. Like, if you don't choose, I think, to say like, hey, we're going to force ourselves to obey God, eventually I think he sends the pressure to send us out and go. And it's always better if you choose it, I think. But I don't know where I was going with that, but it's definitely a tension of not letting yourself get too comfortable.
Yeah.
But I think the church does that. One of the people that you mentioned is one of my personal, like, I don't want to say heroes, that's the wrong word, but God has used the story of Philip in my life a lot of different times in a lot of powerful ways. And I had a moment a few years ago when I just randomly one day was in his story in Acts. And then a year later to the date, I was back in it. And God just spoke to me through his story. And one of the things I love about Philip is sometimes when I read a story that doesn't have a lot of background or context, and my imagination can just fill it in. That's kind of Philip and Stephen for me.
Yeah.
Because I realize this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but when I was in college, Brandon and I were like running like a college ministry, and we got in an argument over that story because, and this is just shows such a difference between two human beings who read a passage completely. There's no information in the passage. Brandon read the story of the seven as this kind of like noble, like, look at them chosen to serve God. I read it as they had to wait tables while the rest of the guys went and had fun. Right?
The apostles were like, we're not going to waste our time waiting tables.
Right.
We'll commit our life to preaching God's word and to prayer.
Right. And so what's funny is like, it took years for me to fully flesh this out, but people that know Brandon, and you don't know him super well, but like serving and like, it's like his love language. So for him, that story is like Stephen, the servant. And I'm like, dude, Stephen got the shaft, man. Because I read that story and I was like, what would I feel if I'm like, wait, you want me to just sit here? You're going to go around the world? I got to just, what? No, wait, guys. And Philip, to me, is interesting because Philip later is called an evangelist. So he had a call in his life to do more than, and again, Brandon hates it when I use this language. And I understand why, so I'm careful. Like, he had a call to do more than just wait tables. Not that waiting tables isn't a call or a great important thing to do, but God he had a plan for Philip that was more than that. It was beyond, it was going around the world, but it took, number one, it took Philip being faithful in that moment, because he could have said, I'm not doing that. I'm called to be an evangelist. I'm out of here. But in being faithful, then all this stuff happened and he ends up going, and you see these 2 or 3 great chapters just about him and his ministry and his impact. And I think what's interesting about that is I love how for Philip, he had to choose, in these moments, he had to choose, like, and again, I'm completely reading into this. It's not there. But like, did Philip have to say, like, I don't want to sit here and do that? Okay, fine, God. And then there's this moment where it says, he's called to go, and there's 2 roads. There's the common road that everyone travels, and he ends up taking God tells him to take the backwater, dusty road that doesn't go through any real towns. And again, was he like, I don't want to take that. Why am I taking that road, God? And that's where he meets the Ethiopian and has these great encounters. Like, where God says, like, I know it feels difficult. I know you don't understand what you're going through right now, but I have a plan. Trust me, obey me. And choosing to trust God in the pressure is oftentimes the greatest challenge I think we face as human beings.
When I hear the story of Philip and Stephen in the 7, I frame it up maybe in a different way than you and Brandon to a degree. I frame it up with that simple quote that it said, choose 7 from among you that are full of the Spirit and full of wisdom. They're well respected, but they're full of the Spirit and full of wisdom. And I wonder if Stephen, if Philip, if the other 5 that we don't know their names. I mean, we know more about Philip the evangelist than we do Bartholomew. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bartholomew the apostle. So obviously Philip had something on his life and something that God was going to do in and through him. But I wonder if they were more focused on that, being the full of the Spirit of God and full of wisdom, than on their function. And because you've met people who like, oh, whatever you need, whatever you need, I'm in. I'm there. I picture guys like that who went into it with a, do I want to wait tables? No. Did I go get a degree to wait tables? No. Is this something I've been dreaming about going, God, let me be a waiter of tables? Probably not. But my mind's always seen them as people that were less focused on the thing and more focused on that idea of, you know what? I'm just going to be all that God's called me to be. I'm going to receive all that he is and walk in that wisdom. And then you see Philip sort of step out. And that's where I do think it's interesting that he was just a guy full of the Spirit and full of wisdom. And there was more is a weird word, but it makes sense in our human minds right now. But there was definitely an addition to his calling. I wonder if Philip would have said no to waiting tables if we would have missed him in the rest of Scripture.
Right. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Like, what if you had said, no, I'm an evangelist. I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
Like, I know you've experienced this because you ran Master's Commission. When you work with young, passionate Christian,
everybody wants to be
men,
an evangelist.
They all have like, what do you want to do with your life? Well, I'm going to start a missionary in Africa and also be in a Christian band and all these like.
I'm going to travel the world and preach the gospel at massive conferences.
And you're like, well, actually, our bathrooms need to be cleaned. I'm not doing that. And it's like, that was somewhat my story. And one of the greatest things that happened to me coming out of college was nothing, right? Nothing. Like 5 years of a desert, where I had some people in my life be like, just serve, just do what's in front of you.
So many times in my life, I've went to God and I've said, God, I'm falling behind. I don't know if you've ever had that comment. I'm falling behind, God. At this point in time in my life, I should be further along. I'm in my 20s. I have friends that are leading churches already. I have friends that are traveling the world and preaching places all over. I'm falling behind. And this, I promise you, I've had this conversation with God more times than I care to admit. And I mean, even this, stepping into Rice City, this is not some small assignment from God. This is not some small weight. This is a dream. This is a dream. This doesn't happen. But God has his way. As I just look back and go, as we remain faithful in whatever he's placed in our hand, God has a way of orchestrating things. And when we get on the other side, we look back and we go, huh. So like if I would have been frustrated in previous seasons, quit and went a different direction, I wouldn't be here today.
Sure.
And so like if I would have crumbled under the pressure, there's a proverb, I'm going to quote it so poorly right now, but it's something about if you crumble under the pressure, how little is your strength. If I would have crumbled under the pressure and pulled the ripcord and got out, or just decided I was going to go do my own thing to make my own thing happen so I could accelerate my own timeline, I think sometimes that's a miss. And I think it's wise for us, no matter the season, to not get too caught up in the idea of, well, I have to be doing this by this timeline.
Yeah. Which is just its own form of pressure.
Yeah.
It's a pressure we put on ourselves, but it's a pressure. And I think that's why it was a good word you chose. Because you could have chose like, horrible things. It's not always horrible things. Sometimes it's just pressure. Sometimes it's just like, that like, yeah, let me get out of this. I don't like this. I don't want this. And I think what's cool about those passages and even what you shared, your whole message is just like to live a life that's defined by trusting God is to live a life that you don't have to come to a place where you like it, like pressure. Like there's no in the Bible that says love every minute of this. It just says trust me through it. Don't let it be the thing that causes you to give up. Mm-hmm. When you see Stephen getting stoned and you're like, what in the world? It's not like I like this. I'm happy about this. God, whatever. You can wrestle with it, but like just keep trusting, keep going, and believe in your heart this sense and like I trust that God is good and has good things for me, and will use this pressure for something good. And I think that's so important because you look at the scriptures and you look at the passages like the ones you preach on, and you see it. You see examples of it, and then you talk to other people who have this is what happened in my life, and it's like that faith comes from hearing kind of that sense of like God is trustworthy. Like I can trust him through this pressure. I can trust him in these moments of difficulty and believe that he has something on the other side, that he'll work this out for good, that he'll bring about something better in my life if I just keep following him through it. Even if it's just the pressure of when, God.
I even think about like in something that may be applicable for everyone. It's the amount of political pressure, financial pressure, the economy and all the things that surrounds that. And it's easy for us to just literally go into sort of like hiding protection mode during sort of like turmoil seasons, to put as much shielding and covering over us so we can just, just hold on. If the early church would have just like sort of hunkered down in Jerusalem and held on, they would have all been arrested, killed, and, where does it go? But the apostles stayed in Jerusalem. So the 12 apostles didn't go anywhere, according to the scripture in Acts chapter 8. It was the believers who were scattered, which there's a thought to that when the gospel started spreading across the known world at the time, it started with just believer. Like their title was believer. And that's the title. They were Christians. They were followers of Christ. And faithful were they. And that's where I was trying to drive it to in the message, to remind people that if you're a believer, a calling, and we can sort of like hunker down and stay in our little, I love the word you used earlier, the holy huddle, stay in our little holy huddle of shielded protection. And I get that there's elements that there's some wisdom in some of that, but there's also a calling. And so I don't want to be, I want to make sure I protect my family, but I also don't want to shield my family's opportunity from reaching people, reaching the lost, seeing people, And so how can I make an impact this week? So maybe like if you're watching or you're listening to this and you're at work, like maybe today's the day, pray for the person who's lost, that you can go, hey, God, help me develop a relationship, a friendship, give me the words to speak, the heart to give, live a generous life, and allow the pressure of our modern day world and all of its facets produce, great things in and through our life. And so that would be like maybe an encouragement I would give as we.
Yeah, and that sets up for next week, right?
Yeah.
Where you're headed with the whole series. Series of we say wake up and rise, which are very personal, very about you as an individual, coming to this place of, I know that I need this and I want to follow Jesus and I want him to remake me and restore me. In order to what? And it's like, well, to spread, to be seed. And so we're kicking that off on Sunday, and it'll probably run through most of September, probably.
Yeah, probably September.
So yeah, I encourage you to make sure you're here. And by here, I mean, I don't like to have you here. I know online is cool, but love to have you here.
If you live in San Diego,
come by, man. Get off the couch.
By. Yeah.
But if you can't, maybe you're in a position that's not possible, we still appreciate you and appreciate you watching and joining us online, and love to hear from you guys as well if that's your situation. But either way, it's going to be a good month, and love to have everyone be a part of it and hear what God's going to say through it. So, anything else you want last minute?
No.
Okay.
No.
We got to get to our staff meeting. Our week is all screwed up because of Labor Day, taking Monday off, but it's going to be a good week. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. And we'll see you next episode of Dig Deeper after we start the new Wake Up, Rise, and What series this weekend. Thanks, guys.